Time for another edition of Trust Tuesdays with our friends at the Better Business Bureau of Central Oklahoma. Mr. Sean Rose, ladies and gentlemen, always good to see you.
Always good to see you.
If you don't follow this guy on Instagram, well, you should. It's a great sense of humor, and some of the things you post, I'm like, that's pretty funny, actually.
Random thoughts of the day.
Exactly, and sometimes you just need a random thought of the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need a plan for your business, though, as we segue into some serious topic here. You know that hurricane that came in off the East Coast really affected and still is affecting a lot of businesses throughout the country. And that's one of the things, in a way, we're going to talk about today is disaster preparedness for your business, and perhaps not to that extreme level, but perhaps.
But yeah, I mean, it always helps having a plan and, you know, kind of at least thinking about it a little bit, so.
Yeah, because you have this stat here, an estimated quarter of all businesses, they don't reopen following some sort of major shutdown.
Exactly, yeah, and it's crazy to think that, but when you kind of think about the implications of when you're in like a disaster zone, and then even like there's some businesses that shut down because all their suppliers are right in that disaster zone, and if they can't get product for however long, then they can't really run a business, so they have to close their doors. Distribution
cycle shuts down, that affects everybody along the chain.
Absolutely.
Well, let's dive into it, because Sean has provided some helpful tips for us on this Trust Tuesday of what you can do to help your company out to endure those disasters. And number one, and maybe it's the obvious thing, but have a plan.
Right, exactly. Like at least have the conversation, because you need to start looking at, okay, what kind of area am I in? You know, if I'm on one of the coasts, I could be in a hurricane zone. If I'm in Oklahoma, you know, there's tornadoes, now there's earthquakes. I mean, there's all these different things. So actually coming up with an actual plan and then communicating that with your employees is kind of a big thing. It's one of those things where, you know, you need to know what to do, but your staff also needs to know what to do, because some staff, you know, your leadership team, your management team is going to have different responsibilities, and they need to understand, like, why am I doing this and why is this important?
I think those last 2 points there are very, very crucial here. Who's responsible for doing what? You know, so that they really know, hey, here's why I'm doing that, and to your point, why it's important in that area.
Exactly, yeah, and you know, one good thing about that too is, you know, sometimes it's been interesting, because I actually was talking to a business that had been impacted by a disaster, and they said, you know, the crazy thing is we didn't know that some of our employees could work remotely, and we kind of realized that, and then when the business reopened, you know, we just kind of kept them remote, and then they'd kind of cycle in and out of the office just however they wanted. But it was weird to see that a disaster helped them identify even more efficiencies. So maybe if you're talking through your plan with your staff, you might be able to see a couple more efficiencies that you can start putting into place ahead of time.
Invest in that technology helps you out a little bit.
Absolutely.
You mentioned this earlier, though, the communication part, and that's a huge thing, that so people are aware.
Right, and a lot of people don't realize that there is an emergency plan, and then there's an emergency communication plan. And that's kind of key, because, you know, if the emergency happens and you don't really communicate it, then
it's chaos.
Right? Yeah, people just show up and they're like, oh, well, I didn't know we couldn't come to work, or, you know. So it's one of those things where, you know, you make sure that you have all the employee contact information, make sure that, you know, you have any vendor contact information, know who you need to communicate with ahead of time. At BBB, like I know we call into our businesses if there's ever a storm or a severe, you know, kind of tornado or something like that. We go through and we call the businesses in that area just to be like, hey, is everything okay? How's everything? Like, is your staff okay? Just to check in on them. And they're like, oh, I didn't even realize we should probably call people and tell them we're okay. And it's like, yeah, you know, you can check in and mark yourself safe on Facebook in a disaster, but a business can't really do that. So it's one of those things where you need to make sure you're communicating at all times.
It's also important to know what your inventory looks like, just because maybe it's not there, you can't access it, but you need to know, and probably to relay to insurance, maybe.
Absolutely.
What it looks like.
Yeah, so, you know, documenting, you know, your inventory, your assets, making sure that you know everything, and, you know, with everybody has a camera in their phone now, so, you know, just pull it out, videotape the outside of your building, videotape the inside of your building, go through, make sure that there's sufficient documentation ahead of any kind of disaster, just for insurance purposes, or even for you, like here with tornadoes and with how things get blown miles away, you might not know you're missing something until you go there one day, a couple months later, to grab this thing or this part, and you're like, oh, where did that go?
Right.
Oh, there was the big hole in the back of the building, maybe that went out, you know what I mean? So that way you can go through and figure out what you need to have, and your insurance can even say, okay, yes, here's, you know, not just the money for the damage, but the money for the damage and your parts and your assets and all that stuff.
And perhaps that's a good time too, as we just saw there, to back up the files and the documents.
Absolutely. I know some people get scared of the cloud, but that's why it's there. The
cloud could be your friend.
Exactly. And it's one of those things where, you know, your data is a big part of your business, and not just your data, but your customers' data too. So
storage is fairly cheap these days.
Absolutely. And, you know, quite frankly, my rule of thumb is the farther away, the better. So, you know, if you can find a backup service that's in another state that you know isn't going to be impacted, then that way you have that, you know, that dual record keeping. You have one on all the computers in your office, and you have one backed up someplace away.
So you got the digital presence in the cloud. There's probably some sort of physical presence as well.
Right,
so.
Yeah. There's never truly a digital office. Like, there's always paper everywhere.
Yeah, so you got to make sure that the paper documents are protected.
Absolutely, and that's just a big thing you should already probably be doing just as a business, because you want to make sure that data and everything that's on those papers are, you know, protected, maybe in a safe or, you know, fire-resistant safe, stuff like that. I've never seen a business keep a stack of paper by a window, but just in case, don't do that. That's not a good plan.
Kept all the private documents right by that, you know, the screen window.
Exactly, and it worked out really well. But yeah, you don't want that data getting out, you know, if you will, because then your customers are going to feel like, you know, their trust was violated.
Well, our final 2 points here on Trust Tuesday with the Better Business Bureau of Central Oklahoma and Mr. Sean Rose is, you know, we mentioned the technology and the people and remote access, but having a remote place to work from. Absolutely, and it's one of those things where, like, you know, it's always good to be able to be at your office and help kind of take care of everything there, but in the event that you can't get to the office, like here on the coast right now, if it's underwater or if it's, you know, just not accessible, you make sure you can kind of identify another place to work from, even if it's working remote or whatever, and talk to your employees about it, and, you know, reassure them, like, hey, even if the office gets shut down, we still need you to work. You know, you'll still be paid. Everything will run fluidly in that aspect. But also, you know, always make sure you can identify, okay, if everything goes terribly, where else can we work? That brings up a good point. From the business side of things, making sure that you still have those systems in place so that people can get paid. Yeah, because, you know, your employees are really, you're going to see a lot of your employees after a business. You're going to see, like, a lot of their character and a lot of, you know, how passionate and hardworking they are. And so that's one of those things where you want to communicate to them, like, we can tell that you're obviously invested in helping us work this business, run this business, but we also are going to make sure we take care of you too. You also need to take care of your hardware, your laptops, and the equipment. Right, yeah, I mean, obviously it's one of those things where I hope people are doing it already, but in the event, like, there's going to be a storm or something, and you can kind of go ahead of time, you know, cross your fingers, knock on wood, you're not going to be impacted on it, but make sure that you're going through and protecting that, especially in those kind of more, dangerous seasons, if you will. And it's also kind of good ergonomics to not, you know, have power cords just laying across the floor or stuff like that. Pick up the Legos from off the floor and
exactly,
stuff like that.
Right? Yeah, and if you have the employee with Legos, I want to know where you work, because that would be awesome.
Be a fun zone, right?
Absolutely. But yeah, no, really, like, you want to make sure you protect that equipment, and because that way, you know, if just the building gets damaged but nothing inside gets damaged because you've already protected that equipment, you can still operate, you know, a lot more efficiently and get back to work a lot faster. It's good stuff right there. Some disaster preparedness plans for your business and business contingency. You can find more information on their website at bbb.org/Oklahoma City. More Trust Tuesday segments can be found every month on newsok.com. Sean, we always appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure. Catch you next time. Yes, sir.